Hello, and welcome to the Division Facts Orientation for the BD LSR Fortessa, also known as the 5 laser. Today we'll go over the different components of the machine, the maintenance and upkeep, troubleshooting, data management, and general questions and signing up for the calendar and such. First off, we ask all of our users to please sign in on our sign-in sheets. They go over general information about the user, your lab, the time that you're using the machine, and then friendly reminders to clean your area, to fill and empty the respective tanks that we're going to use, and whether or not you've left the machine shut down overnight or for the next user, and any comments that you ran into while you were running if they're deemed worthy of commenting. And please also note, if they're deemed worthy of commenting, that you also follow that up with a message to myself. As we kind of assess the machine, we see that it's comprised of similar parts to our Canto 2, where we have a wet cart, a computer, and a cytometer. The cytometer itself has a user guide, which we will cover in this orientation, but is always here for your reference to follow along. And a configuration here on the side, which shows the 5 different lasers. The 2 that are not on the Canto 2 are the UV laser and the yellow-green laser. Now, similar to, again, the Canto 2, we need to first turn on the computer and log into Windows. The login info is the same as on both machines, which is BD operator as the username and password BDIS #1 for the password. Once you've logged in, allow Windows to boot up for a moment, and then open up TerraTerm, which is the laptop with a yellow background and a T. This opens a little diagnostics window, which I ask you to please just leave running in the background. Minimize whatever you need to do. This helps in case there are any issues that I can then relay direct diagnostic information to BD Biosciences service technicians. So after we have our computer booted up and TerraTerm open, we'll want to turn on the power to the actual cytometer. It's a green button right here on the side. The Fortessa requires at least 20 minutes, up to 30 minutes, to fully power on and allow the lasers to come up to power so that they're stable and ready to operate. While we're letting the machine power up, we can check our tanks. As you can see here, we have our wet cart. The wet cart is comprised of our sheath tank and our waste tank. You can test both by weight to see whether or not they need to be replaced or emptied. This tank, the sheath tank, is actually quite empty, so I'm going to replace it as opposed to top off using a graduated cylinder and funnel. If the tank was about 50% or more, please just use the graduated cylinder and funnel. Pour sheath fluid from any one of our tanks here into the graduated cylinder and funnel. Place the funnel into the top of the tank and pour the graduated cylinder full of sheath fluid directly into the funnel. Do not allow the funnel to fill with liquid. Pour directly down the downspout so that you can monitor the level in real time very carefully as to avoid spill. In this case, as I mentioned, I will be replacing the tank itself. You can easily unscrew this, and what you'll hear is an alarm that goes off, notifying you that the tank is empty. There's a little holster on the side for the probe. Now there's a button on the waste tank that silences that very loud, annoying alarm. But what I'm not sure you can see, I'll try to get up close, is the two alarms right here are still going off. We'll get to that in a minute, but it's the most important step to remember in the maintenance process of this machine. Now that we have the full tank, I'll lift the cube up a little bit, put our probe in, and just gently hand tighten the probe into place. Now what's very important to notice is that one of the alarms, the 1.5 liter warning, has now reset itself. However, the empty alarm, it has not reset. This is vitally important that you manually restart the wet cart. This is because if you do not do that, the machine can still operate and will draw liquid from this side tank and empty without being constantly replenished from the wet cart below. Please remember to hit the restart button anytime you've triggered the alarms here. And always look whether or not you've replaced the tank, that this alarm button, these alarm lights are not on. If your waste tank needs to be replaced, you can loosen the probes here and put in the little side holster out of the way. Take your waste tank and unscrew the filter. This filter must be placed in this orientation only. It cannot be upside down or to the side. What we are trying to avoid is getting water or liquid on this paper filter. If this paper filter gets wet, as liquid fills in this tank, the air has no way to dissipate if it's impeded by a wet filter. And the back pressure will go back into the cytometer and affect the fluidics. So place this upside down. You can then take this tank to the sink out in the hallway and dump it down the drain. Please make sure to run water as you're dumping this down the drain to dilute any of the bleach that's been in the tank. When you're ready to reinstall the waste tank, you can find bleach here. And go ahead and fill the tank to this first line so that if in the event this were to fill, the remaining solution or the resulting solution would be at 10% bleach and inactivate any live cells. We can then screw our filter back on. Just hand tighten, does not need to be very tight at all. And then you can take your probe and hand tighten that in place as well. This can be stowed in the wet cart as such. Now there is no need to plunge air out of the lines for the sheath tank or the waste tank. Of course not the waste tank, but for the sheath tank, like we have done on the Canto 2. And this is because our lines that go into the wet cart do not come apart, do not come detached from the wet cart itself. Similar to the Canto 2, but since we only have one tank that's going into the cytometer itself, we'll look right here next. This is our air filter. With two hands, you can remove this air filter and check to see if there's any air that has been trapped before going into the machine. It's important that we bleed this air filter to prevent any air from going up into the cytometer itself. With the tube located pointing towards the ceiling, you can install this back into place here, with the clips only touching the very dark gray material. Please do not allow the clips to go over the white connection here, because, as this actually was, can become disconnected. Make sure that that is always connected there before moving on to any next steps. In order to bleed the filter, there's a roller which just rolls down, and liquid will come out into the beaker here. Allow this about 5 to 10 seconds, or until you do not see any more air coming from the filter. Then you can roll this back up into place. There's another roller just upstream of the tubing that's going into the cytometer. Please follow the same steps. If there's no evidence of air, we can roll this back up into place. You can empty the beaker into the waste or down the sink. At this stage, we've emptied our tank here, and you can see the pump will continue to fill from this sheath tank into our reservoir here, which is pressurized to run liquid through the machine at a constant pressure. Train your ear to listen for that pump to be activated while operating the cytometer. Now that we've gotten any air out of the lines, we can open up the Diva software on the desktop. When you've completed your orientation, we'll create your own user account on this computer. For now, I will use mine.
Now that we're logged in, we can open up an experiment or create a new one in the browser window. We can create specimens and tubes. Now the software will take a few minutes to connect, which you can see down in the right-hand corner. And you can also monitor the connection in TerraTerm to make sure that there's communications going on. Once it's done booting up, you'll have access to control the software. The difference between this machine and the Canto 2 is that once we go into the next steps, you'll want to be ready to actually run your samples. So what I would suggest now is to create some of your gates and to go into the cytometer settings, choose your parameters that you wish to use, delete the ones you are not going to use. When you click the pointer here, you activate the acquisition dashboard, which allows you to acquire and record and to change the settings for the events to record and the gate at which you choose to select the events. When you're ready to begin running samples, you can see the way that the machine is set up here is a little bit different than the Canto 2. You can see that there's actually a tube loaded with water. This remains on the probe to keep the probe lubricated because there is no backflush that exists on the Canto 2. Another difference is this arm is not spring-loaded and can move in both directions. Please be careful as you move this back and forth that you do not catch the probe and bend it. So with the arm moved to the side, you can hear an aspirator pump kick on. If you do not hear this, please look here and make sure that the toggle switch is pointed up towards the tube and not down towards the plate. With the arm to the side, we're going to remove our tube, come over to our panel here. It is in standby now. With no tube loaded and the arm to the side, we can prime. It is extremely important to only prime with no tube loaded and the arm to the side, as you see here. Do not prime with a tube loaded, whether it's water, bleach, and especially not cells. After the machine is done priming, it will default back to standby. Please prime 2 to 3 times, no matter if you're the first user of the day or in the middle of the day. It's important to do this step anyways. Now that the prime has defaulted back to standby, we've created a lot of turbulence in the system. And so we want to put a tube of water onto the probe no more than 2 milliliters, center the arm, place the machine in run and on high. This will stabilize the fluidics that we've just disrupted by priming. After about 20 to 30 seconds of the machine running on high with water, you can change the speed, the flow rate, back down to low or medium to run your samples. At this stage, the machine stays in run until you are done or take a break from running samples. In order to run your next sample, now that the fluidics are stabilized, you move the arm to the side, take the water tube off, take a sample that's been filtered immediately before putting onto the machine. That's key. You always want to filter all of your samples before loading them onto the machine, no matter if it was a step earlier in your sample preparation or not. It needs to be the very last step before loading onto the machine. So now we take our tube of sample, load it onto the machine, center the arm. Now, as I said, the machine is always in run, so as of right now, you want to work quickly. Come to the acquisition dashboard, begin acquiring your data. That is some dirty water. As you can see, there's a high threshold rate. And we can record. If this was a compensation tube or a control tube, we can adjust the voltages in our cytometer window. After you've calculated compensation, though, please do not change the voltages, as this will affect your compensation matrix. If this were a sample, we'd record, stop acquiring, and then go to the next tube. And just repeat the process for as many samples as you have. So as I mentioned, all samples must be filtered before running on this machine. However, clogs happen. If you think you have a clog because you have a sample tube loaded, there's clearly sample there, but you're not seeing any events based on the threshold rate or events in your plots, please first check that this connection is secure and that there is pressure coming out of that filter. Also, make sure that your tanks are full and empty respectively, and that there are no sheath tank alarms on. So at this point, we do have a real clog. We want to make up a tube of bleach, about 2 mLs of bleach and water. We'll load the tube on, center the arm, run on high, and at that stage, I want you to come over and mark where the meniscus is. Let that bleach run for about 5 minutes. You should gradually see the liquid level drop below the meniscus, and at that point, you can successfully say that you've cleared the clog. As I mentioned before, you will want to run water immediately following the bleach before proceeding with your samples, and make sure that the water level is higher than the initial bleach level that you put in, but not so as to touch any of the plastic or the rubber fitting at the top of the probe. Then switch the speed, the flow rate, back to low or medium for when you're running your samples. if you think that there could be an air bubble in the system, you can diagnose this by still seeing potential threshold rate here of events per second of sample being run through the machine. But you've actually lost side scatter. So you'll see events stacking up along the x-axis, along the forward scatter here, but no side scatter. Now that's because an air bubble got into the flow cell and is actually deviating the stream and missing part of the laser. Like I said, it's a little tricky to diagnose, but if you think that's what you have, as I mentioned with the clog, please check all your air lines and make sure the connections are fit, and then go through the priming steps by removing the tube with the arm to the side, and then prime 2 to 3 times. Then, after we prime, we always load a tube of water, center the arm, and run on high to stabilize the fluidics. Once that's done, switch it back to low or medium, and then you're ready to start running your samples again. Many issues with electronics, as we all know, can be remedied by turning it off and turning it back on. Please shut down the computer fully, not a restart. Power off the cytometer, and then start back with the computer on first, log into Windows using the computer login info that we discussed before and is posted on the monitor. Turn the power back onto the machine. If you do this within 5 or 10 minutes, you won't have to worry about the lasers warming back up, and usually that gets rid of any other finicky kind of issues that may come up from either slow operating or weird, odd error messages that come up. If once you've done that, you're still having issues, please come find me. Or if you're having trouble getting rid of a clog or an air bubble, also please come find me. I'm usually situated in the cell sorter room over in 6032I on the opposite side of the hallway. I'm always happy to help. At this point, fast forward to you being done with your samples. We want to clean the machine after we're done. So we'll remove the water tube. We'll make up a tube of bleach using our bleach bottle. Put a little bit of bleach in the bottom. Raise the level of water on top of that to about 2 to 3 mLs at max. It's very important that when your tube is loaded onto the machine, that the water does not come anywhere near this gray cone or the black rubber fitting at the top. The liquid should always be about halfway of the tube or below. Then you'll run and put the flow rate to high. Please run bleach and water for 5 minutes each. On this machine, it's also important, because there is no backflushing in between samples, that your water level is just slightly above your bleach level to make sure it rinses off any residual bleach that may be contacted on the probe. Once you're done running your water for 5 minutes, you can leave the water tube loaded and place the machine in standby. In fact, at this stage, the machine is ready to be passed on to the next user. If we were done for the day, then we could power off the machine using that button, that green button. So now that you've finished running your samples, you obviously want to get your data. Data management is a very important part of both the purpose of using these machines, but also in order to keep an efficient running core. So we have a policy that you're not allowed to keep any experiments that contain data within the BD software. So if you've just created your experiment and recorded all of your files, your samples, and you want to keep that to use at a future date, please right-click the experiment, duplicate without data, and then rename this new experiment without data your template. That way, you can always access the original document just without the data, and you can import and export that as necessary. When you right-click, again, on that experiment, you can export as an experiment and FCS files. You will want to do this both. On the desktop, you should see a BWH RIA3 icon. This folder is the server for the RIA and has a fax data folder which has Fortessa experiment files and Fortessa FCS files. As I mentioned, please export as both. It will be difficult to figure out which one is which once they're exported, so that's why you should compartmentalize them into each different folder. Once you've exported your template and your experiment as both experiment and FCS files, please delete your experiment that contains data. It is vitally important that we do this to keep a functioning core, because otherwise the software gets bogged down with over 100 users' experiments and can inevitably crash the system, causing long delays and fixes that are required of BD service technicians. Once you've exported your data, you can access the RIA3 server on your own personal computer by following the directions listed on our website. Once you've exported your data, and the machine is in standby after having run bleach and water, now you can decide whether you're going to power off the system using the green button here, or leave it on for the next user. That brings me to discuss the calendar. The calendar is not a perfect system, and many people will book time that they either forget about or their experiment fails, and so we can't just take what's on the calendar verbatim. Please make sure that if you are considering leaving the machine on, it is your responsibility until you pass it on to the next user. Please go onto the calendar, determine who is on next after you, contact them directly. If you get a response back, of course you can ask whether or not they want to continue to use the machine, and you can leave it on for them if so. If not, if you're having trouble contacting them or not, please shut the machine down. It may be a nuisance for them to have to turn the machine back on, but it beats having the machine being left on overnight if they didn't happen to show up for their time. We appreciate you compliant in that and saving the life of our machines. Thank you. Now finally, you may ask yourself why we didn't go through running more in depth on the samples. This orientation serves as the general maintenance and upkeep of these machines, and in part helps to train you on these instruments and get you comfortable running. The second part of that is to collaborate with the other users in your group who have more experience and will be able to accompany you for the next time that you are going to be learning and running the samples and learning the machine. So I want you over the next couple of weeks to shadow and then to eventually run the machine with another user so that they can monitor you and make sure that you're confident and feel confident operating on your own. It is vitally important for you to do this because the software is the steepest learning curve of learning to operate these machines and require the help of somebody who is savvy and has experience. Ultimately, once you feel comfortable using the machine, please notify me and we can set up accounts for you and an account on the calendar so that then you can begin to book your own time and run on your own. I hope you found this orientation informative, and please always note that when in doubt, this orientation is accessible via our website. We also have the user guides here that are spelled out for you step by step. And any of our other resources are available on our website, which is also listed here for future reference. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this orientation. I'll see you around.